You're in trouble now.
So welcome. We're just beginning the meeting.
Of course we are.
Yeah. All right. So we're talking about Zoom, the transition off of the Zoom licenses to the RingCentral licenses, and we're just going over the steps to add the new conference rooms to your calendar, how to use the account, how to start a meeting, and that process. So thank you for joining us. Let's see here. Okay, so let me go back to the chair. And before I go to that share, so I sent that email about how to add it as a shared calendar. Did anybody try it? Any questions? Would you like to just quickly show you how I do it as far as a walkthrough process? Any questions on that? No? Okay. Well, for the sake of edification, I will go ahead and add this here. Okay, so I'm going to go into my post account. I'm going to go into my post calendar. And then in the emails that I sent, I had this, the ID, the resource share ID. And so there's about a handful of ways that you can add a shared calendar. But in this example, what you would do, you can see I already have these here. And you can also change and edit any of the colors that you might want to include. So if you want to color it something unique to you, once you add it, you would be able to, make that color unique. And there's also some share settings that I can't control as an admin, but you could add into your own individual use that you might want to just look through. One of the ones I think that could be pretty useful is the description. So as an example, what you could do is put, the meeting ID information if you ever forget it, and you could add it to your shared calendar, and then that way it would be available to you to see and have for later. But what we're here to talk about is just how to add it. And so one of the ways that you can add this shared calendar is to click the other calendars, click the plus sign here, then say subscribe to calendar. And then you can start searching for things, and it might actually just come up. So like here's conference 2, or to be honest, it's a little bit of a mess right now, and I'll explain why. But the idea for this subscribe to calendar, you would copy that URL, or actually it's kind of an email address. You would copy that resource here, and you would paste it in there, and then you would add it. The reason why I said it's a bit of a mess right now is because when you browse our resources, you can see we have these resources, but I also have all of the old conference room resources, and I've relabeled these to be removed starting in May 1. And so when May 1 comes, I'll start to clean this up a little bit. And so onboarding would be a little, more straightforward, I hope. But in the meantime, to get those calendars added so that you can have them here, just copy those links and include them. I'll just take a quick break there. Any questions?
Hey, Eric, are we not going to have conference room front, conference room back, and Lighthouse room in the new space at 222?
Yeah, that's a good question. For now, I just labeled them conference 1, 2, and 3. In the new space, we will still have the back conference room, the front conference room, Lighthouse, and then we'll be we have 3 other phone rooms that will be used for meeting and huddle spaces. And then we also have Diane's room, and she has agreed to not only use it as her office, but when she's not available, make it a conference room. So when it's said and done, we went from 3 kind of huddle room meeting spaces, and we'll end up with about, I think, 6 unique specific spaces of different sizes to carry on group meetings. Now, the naming of those is one of those things that I'm not exactly sure what and how we'll come up with those, but that's also kind of to be determined when we come back. And then if we come up with creative names for them, then we'll make sure to update the meeting rooms accordingly.
But we're not getting rid of front conference room, back conference room, Lighthouse conference room calendars right now, right? Because I have things that are scheduled that when we move back, I'm going to be using those rooms.
Yeah, so for now, what I would say is of those calendars physically that we had called like comp back and comp front and in Google, those physical calendars, I was planning to then remove because they won't be relevant at this point in time. And then when we come back, I would take the 3 conference rooms and assign them to a room resource that, depending on whatever we call it, and then adding the additional room resources. The bigger picture kind of going forward when we move back to 222 and one of the issues that we were having with the Zoom licenses is that we only had 3 Zoom licenses. And we also had 3 meeting spaces, front, back, and lighthouse. Now we're going to have a lot more meeting spaces, huddle rooms, conference rooms, and the 3 licenses automatically seem to be a little bit impactful because we all needed them. And to be honest, we were already planning on doing this conversion before the shelter-in-place provisions. And now that we're all on virtual meetings, we changed gears a bit. And one of the things that we decided to do was give 14 people in the organization their own meeting resource up to 100 people, so that could take a lot of the load off. And then we're adding 3, transitioning from the 3 group resources to the 3 new RingCentral resources so that the rest of the staff, when they need, can share. Now, those 3 resources give you the use and ability to support 100 users. Now, as you know, we each still have, with our RingCentral account, have an audio bridge for conferences that is up to 100 people. And you also have, if you have the standard license account, you're not one of the 14 people, then you have the ability to set up a web meeting through RingCentral Meeting. And then you can have 5 people, but that's 4 other people, including yourself, for 5. So
Right,
I'm not sure if that exactly answered your specific question, but I see you.
No, my concern is meetings like the staff meeting, the board meeting, committee meetings, that when we come back, we will more than likely have actual physical people in the office. And those calendar invites have been sent out to board members or committee members. And what I don't want is for them to suddenly have it disappear and then think, oh, I don't have this, I don't have to go to this meeting anymore, or have them kind of freak out. So I don't think we should do anything with the actual back conference room, front conference room, lighthouse conference room. Get rid of Zoom Open Madrid. That's fine.
Well, I'll have to look at that, and you and I, we can kind of work through that specifically. Yeah. The way that those conference rooms were set up, and this is also kind of somewhat similar but different, is that you have the meeting itself, the calendar invite that has the description of where to go and what you need to meet. And then you also have the room that it's associated. Those 3 separate pieces of information are 3 separate pieces of information. So the detail that's included in the calendar invite itself, and then the room that's associated to that calendar invite. So with that said, you can leave the calendar invite as is. I'm not deleting your calendar invite. You could edit that calendar invite with new meeting information, and also change the room. At this point, it doesn't really matter because we're all virtual from 222 anyways. But if imagine we were at 222 and we were going to host it in the, huddle room, phone room 2, but now we're going to move it to the lighthouse because more people are going to be involved, you would still take your calendar invite, just change the room from, phone room 2 to the lighthouse, and then you would then also edit the content in the calendar invite as far as how to join the meeting. So it's a little bit of a complication, but if you're asking specifically, there are calendar invites in the future, and I don't want to make any changes to any of those calendar invites.
Right.
Then yes, we're going to have a problem, because if those calendar invites include conference information and licenses like Zoom, which the plan was not to move forward with them, then we're, that's going to need to change. But if it's just that it's been marked in the calendar and we want to make sure that they're still in the calendar, then that should be the same. But let's
Yeah, why
I don't
don't
know
we
if
do
there's
it
more
offline?
questions on that, but yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and there might be more related questions to that, but yeah, let's take a couple of examples, and we can take it offline, you and me, and just walk through.
Yeah, let's talk about offline, because there's committee meetings that are set in the future that don't have any, conference. It's just literally reserving that room for physical
Right,
actual meeting in person.
right.
And that I can't afford to have those disappear or change.
Yeah, and I think that still could be the case, because as an example, let me just go back into the share, and unless there's any specific questions on that, but we could walk through an example of one. There's three things that I want to make sure that everybody on the call knows is: one, how to add the new shared calendar resources to your calendar. Two, how to add the meeting invite that you create to make sure it's associated to those resources. And then the third one is, once you then have a meeting, how to use it and how to know that you can use it. Now, that's also one of the benefits that I think we'll have here, is because we're linking the conference resource directly with the room itself. I hope that that reduces the confusion of, which was the previous state, which is not only do you have to create the calendar invite, but you also had to link the room resource, and you also had to find a Zoom account that didn't have a conflict and schedule the time in that Zoom account. In the new plan going forward, each of the licenses associated to an online meeting will be individually and specifically associated to the room itself. So the thought here is, as long as you've booked the room, you are also booking the use of all of the resources within that room.
Right.
And that should be simpler and easier for everybody, but the only quite kind of caveat, and I shouldn't even mention it, is that it still doesn't stop somebody from going into one of the shared accounts and just jumping in and like Zoom bombing or RingCentral bombing it and just being in there. And then it might still happen where you got to be like, hey, I booked this room and I have this resource and it's on the calendar. But the benefit to this in the prior state is, again, the prior state, you had to look through Google what all the shared availability was in the Zoom licenses. You had to schedule it in your Zoom resource in the Zoom account. Then you had to go back into Google and then note which of those Zoom accounts you're going to use. And in that Google Calendar, you had to add the room to that. And none of that process either stopped or prevented or controlled somebody from double booking a meeting resource like in Zoom Oak, and because Zoom itself doesn't know our calendar and they weren't interconnected or integrated. And so the issue that we had from time to time is there would be time when the three resources were there when people booked two meetings at the same time using the same resource. And regardless of whether or not it was in the calendar or not, I do hope that this is an improvement, because we've given 14 people their own dedicated resource. We still have right now 3 provisioned accounts that are available. That will be expanded to 6. And the room itself is licensed with its own online conference resources. So as long as you book the room, then you have access to everything in that room. And so I hope that's going to be an easier transition. And we're literally going from total capacity of online meeting space to 300 total people in the 3 separate meeting accounts to something like 1,600 people if we went all full bore, every resource that we had available. And so my small and short of it is we're multiplying the amount of available online meeting resource by 5, and we cut the cost compared to what our current cost by 30%. So that's a nice win-win-win. But okay, good. Questions about Susie's point or any other thing related to just the transition that we're making from the managing these different resources to from Zoom to RingCentral? Lindsay, you have that.
Okay, when you have been saying room, do you mean back conference room, front conference room, lighthouse room?
Yeah, good question. So yes, although right now I haven't associated any of these conference 1, conference 2, conference 3 to a physical space. Eventually I will, but for the ease of simplicity, because there's still some conversations of what are we going to call these rooms,
Mhm.
and why at this point in time associate them to a physical place when we're still all virtual. So at this point I haven't, but in the future, when I say room or meeting or schedule, and we are at 222, when you go into the calendar and you say, I want to book the Lighthouse from, 3 to 4 on, September 3rd, then that's all that you'll need to do to schedule your meeting and utilize the license for online conference associated to that room. Because every room, every huddle room, every phone room will have its own dedicated conference room license.
Okay. So let's say, because I can poke holes all day. Let's say Tori and I go into
Yeah.
the Lighthouse room, and or somebody else goes into the Lighthouse room, and therefore then whatever conference 2 that's tied to the Lighthouse room is then locked up, but they're not using that line. And I have at the same time a phone call that I can have at my desk,
right,
that I have with partners or the GIS teams of our partner entities, and
right.
I want to use the conference line, the Zoom line, RingCentral line, it's associated with the Lighthouse room because the person that's in there is not using it.
That's right.
How does that work?
Okay, so the scenario is, if I just heard you correctly, you booked the Lighthouse room.
Or let's say somebody else booked the Lighthouse room. They're having an internal meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Because they booked the room, the conference line is booked as well.
That's correct.
Is there any way to book the room without booking the conference line and leaving the conference line available for somebody else to utilize while you're in that room not using it?
Technically, yes, but practically speaking, it's so confusing that I'm saying technically, let's just be thinking about the resources for each of the room are associated to that room. And as long as you book the room, then you are privileged to use all of the resources associated to that room. If we're living in a world where we're kind of splitting up, those resources associated with each of the room, it's going to get really confusing. And so that's why I would say technically you could.
Okay.
But practically speaking, I don't think we'll need to, because practically speaking, let's say you're in the Lighthouse because you only want to meet with 4 or 5 people, and you don't want to take the boardroom, the back conference room, or the front conference room because it's way too big. But the Lighthouse room's perfect, and you're having a meeting, but you don't need any of the online resources. The negative of this is that those people in that room are technically also, not technically, but practically, not even practice. They're able to also use the online meeting license during that time that would be associated with the Lighthouse room. I guess you could always go, it's like, hey, you guys are meeting, I need a license, but are you using it or not? But I don't think it's going to be a problem. Only in this, maybe it's wishful thinking, but because we're now going from 3 physical rooms to now 6 physical rooms and 6 licensed meeting spaces, I'm hoping that and we have 14 people with their own account. I'm hoping that we're not capacity constrained. Like, we should never run into an issue where it's like, this isn't going to work. And actually, now that we're in the weeds of this, the other thought of it, because we're not even at 222 yet, if we end up needing the 3 licenses aren't going to be enough, which I don't think they will be, but if we need more, I can always provision more, because the plan is we're going to have up to 6.
Yeah, so shouldn't we have 6? Shouldn't it be Zoom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for those other?
Yeah, I just didn't do that just because I think we don't need it, and I don't have the physical spaces, and I think 3 is probably what we had, and so it's just replace what it is. But my point on this is, again, play it out into the future. Let's say shelter in place is listed, we are back at 222, but you're working from home, and you need a online meeting. So what would you do? Even though you're not physically at 222, in this scenario, what you would do is find one of the 6 available meeting spaces in your Google Calendar, look at if there's any availability in those 6 spaces. And if you can schedule your meeting in one of those physical spaces, even though you're not physically in the room, you will still and should have and be eligible to use all of the resources.
Okay, Eric, I'm not going to be remembering this for 2 months. Or 3 months. Can we do the more practical thing of how you actually
Sorry.
sign up one of the calendars with all the invite in it stuff? Because I couldn't figure that out.
Let's do that. I love that. Okay, so let me go back to share.
That's why you have me, Walter.
Yeah,
I
that's
take
true.
care of all of that for you.
You just got to follow the chat talk to know how people are feeling about the conversation.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, let me, I need to get that meeting invite. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, we were really going down a rabbit's hole, but I was like really with everybody in that. All right, so let me do this.
Do we know how is construction starting back up?
Let's save that aside. Okay, so here's the email that I sent you. I've just forwarded it out, and then you can see some of the notes of how to add. It's this share link here, the Open Space Trust and a bunch of gobbledygook at Resource, Google Calendar, etc. You would take one of those 3.
Your
Sorry?
screen's not sharing, Eric.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let me share. Great. So it is in the email that I sent. This is a forwarded copy. That's why it looks this way. And you would add, you would go here and you take one of the 3. I would suggest everybody take all 3 of these and just add it as your shared resource in a shared calendar. You would take this link to Open Space and the gobbledygook, and you would copy all of that information. Let me take that. Let me do conference room 1. So you'd copy that. All right, so now let me go into my Google Calendar. I actually already have conference 1 here.
Yeah, I just assume we've added it. Go to the just setting up the meeting, the calendar.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we skipped that part. Okay, yeah, so this is, you would add it there, you add it, you have them all 3 here, you can change the colors, all that good stuff. Now let's say we want to schedule a meeting, and I want to schedule that meeting in conference room 1. So 6 to 7, Walter, puppy review and selection meeting. So we're going to have that meeting here. And so obviously you do everything that you would do a normal calendar invite, the time, place, etc. Add the guest that you want to add to. And then you would add room or location. So when you add room or location, it expands, and then you click add room. You will see the list of other rooms and resources that are available and scheduled in Google, which I will be removing, that won't affect existing calendars. And you would select, going forward, you would see, right now you'd only see 3, but in the future you might see up to 6, and they might change in how they're named. The name itself doesn't change the resource. So in this case, then we just say, I'm going to select conference room 1. So now conference room 1 is selected, and then I add any other details. You might want to copy what the meeting ID is and the other information associated to that room. And
where are you getting that information from?
Yeah, that's a good question. You can get it from a couple of different places. One, it's already in the email that I've provided. And then let's see here.
So we always have to keep that email to have that information. It's not buried within.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Familiar with your email inbox, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be honest, that is exactly how it's done right now with Zoom today. When you add any of these Zoom accounts, it doesn't automatically include the Zoom-related information. So the use case would be pretty much the same, although I had seen that when I did hover over these, although it's not showing up now, I did embed somewhere in the detail in the description of the resource, the meeting information, but again, it's not showing now, so I wouldn't rely on it. I would say if you're going to use one of these 3 meetings, then you have to refer to, okay, well, what's my meeting ID? What's the information associated with the room? And I'll touch on that later because we have labeled these rooms to be what I think are slightly easier to remember and to diagnose, like what I call them, at least for now. So let's just save that for later, and then we'll go here. Now you'll also be able to go, so let me search all available rooms, and they'll be scheduled, so you'll have it there. But let's say we select conference 1, And then in conference one, you select that meeting, you add your individuals to that meeting, and then you send your invite. So now my invite is scheduled here, and you can tell if I go to my shared resources and I say, I only want to see conference one schedules. Right now, conference one, this is the only resource that's scheduled in conference one.
Yeah, I would definitely say it would be much more user-friendly if the information about the conference call came up automatically when you chose that.
I know,
conference 2 or conference 3.
Unfortunately, it doesn't, and it won't do it in a way that automatically adds that resource and the information about that resource, like in the meeting notes, that then becomes shareable. So yeah, I was able to get some slight hack on details, but not to the use case that you were talking about. That was actually my preferred state, is that, you know, and the reason is the room itself is a separate resource from the calendar itself, and the information related to the room resource doesn't necessarily naturally automatically embed itself in the meeting description, which is a bit of that's how it's built. But there it is, and it's scheduled. Questions?
So I just like added, so I have added that. I went to click on it and there was no like RingCentral link in there. You have to copy and paste that in, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what we're saying. If you're gonna include any information for how you want to communicate it to the guests that are gonna be participating in that room, the information that you would need to include would be in the meeting details and description, and you would add it in there.
So Eric, I guess I'm not quite sure, when we don't have physical space, what the value is of conference room 1, 2, and 3 if I have to go and find the RingCentral call-in information anyway from either my own source or the source you provide. In other words, I'm not what's unique about
what's the benefit. Yeah. So the benefit is these 3 licenses are shared with, you know, everyone in the organization, apart from the people who have their own. And so the challenge is yeah, we have conference room 1, 2, and 3, but if I schedule my meeting in the future, I want to make sure that whether it's in a physical location or a virtual online resource, you want to make sure that somebody else isn't also planning to use that same resource at the same time. And so that's the reason why we need the calendar, and you have to include it in your schedule so that you can make sure that we don't have competing and overlapping, you know, scheduled meetings.
Gotcha.
Yep. Good question. Okay, so questions on this. So we talked about how to add it as a viewable calendar. We talked about what the steps would be to add it to the calendar. Now you can also see, like, all I did is I added it as a room, but it showed up also in that calendar. This is not a person. It's a physical, it's called a resource. It's a room that Google defines, and it's now added that calendar, but you'd still have to add all of the attendees who would be joining that meeting that you would like them to, you know, be aware of, and you'd have to add that there. So questions?
As I look at it in the details, it does say meeting ID, how you just typed it in there.
Yeah.
You, like when you go to, let's say, so because you're the owner, conference room 1 shows under my calendars, but under mine, it shows under other calendars. So when I hover over that arrow to the, like, adjacent to the calendar.
The arrow adjacent to the calendar. Like
you just did, like, so the 3 dots, let's say the 3 dots next to conference room 1 in the table of contents. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And you like right click on it or you hover over it, it pops up and it says like settings. Now it appears like you could be able to embed the link and the meeting ID in there so that when someone books that calendar, the meeting ID is already available.
Yeah, good question. Let's see here. So see how in this settings, I included just a description and I labeled meeting ID.
Yes.
But you could include, you know, the meeting ID, it's 222-001.
But because you're the owner.
77.
Yeah. Don't you think you could put that there and then along with the URL, and then we could have that detailed description already attached to the details about the calendar when we book it.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a good
that
question.
is a
If you
solution.
know, if you or anybody knows how I can take a room resource and then take the details associated to that room resource and then include it in the description of the calendar invite, I'd be all ears. For now, I don't have a solution for how the information related to that room resource and the detail associated then transfers to become part of the embedded text that's available here in the, that will be sent to the recipient when they say, I want to accept the meeting. So that's the challenge that we have at the moment.
Gotcha. Sorry, I thought that was a solution right there.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And you can even see, like in that other meeting, I included some text there. But that's only my savings and my preference related to my calendars that I add. But that's a good tip, is that if you easily forget the combinations that define the meeting ID, and I'll just touch on that later, because I do think the syntax that we use to create these meetings are somewhat self-intuitive. So it shouldn't be as complicated as my meeting ID is a random set of 10 digits. We didn't make them a random set of 10 digits. There's kind of a method to the madness. But in this case, you know, you could add it here, go to share settings, and then add your own level of detail here. But again, this does not transfer to the calendar invite. Cool. All right. Okay, so good. Now I got my meeting. It's calendared. My guest has said, yep, they're scheduled, and then hopefully nobody competes against the resources here. Now, again, small caveat, doesn't stop anybody from just taking conference room 1 and not caring about the schedule and just joining in and making a mess of muck of things. But to be honest, that's exactly how Zoom was set up before. So I do hope this eliminates a lot of those concerns, because the resources linked together, but neither here nor there. That aside, now what I wanted to show or talk about is just, okay, great. Now I'm in this meeting. How do I set up my my conference? Do you guys see this RingCentral platform here? Where it says back to meeting scheduled. I think it automatically hides it for you on my share screen.
I see it.
We see it.
Okay, great. So first things first, we all have a RingCentral account, and you need to download the RingCentral's meeting app to use this resource. The RingCentral meeting app looks like a water bottle that's tilted on the side. That's what my mother-in-law said it looked like, so I thought that seemed reasonable. And then this conference room 3 is here. If you click that little drop arrow and then log out, then you'll log out. I'm not going to do that now. Don't do that on your side, or then you can go here and log out. The reason why I'm saying that this might become relevant is that you might be logged into your own personal account, but when you schedule the meeting, you want to use the resources that are available in conference room 2, because my personal account, I can only have 5 people in it. In this meeting, I'm going to have more than up to 100 people. So I need to log out of my personal account. You'll see your name there, and then you'll have to log out and then log back in with one of the resources. Now, obviously, I can't do that here, but I'll show you a little bit of what that would look like on your side. You would click the RingCentral, you would log out, and then you would, when you log out of the RingCentral meetings, you get this prompt, and it says either to join a meeting or sign in. When you sign in, you would use Conference 2 at Open Space Trust, Conference 1, Conference 2, Conference 3, and then you would use the password. The password on these 3 resources are all the same. And as well, for some simplicity, there's a trend in all of the resources here. Conference 1 at Open Space Trust. The password is open 1977 ! And the meeting ID is 222-001-1977. The meeting ID is 222-001-1977. And so depending on what room you've selected, you're just literally changing this digit for each of those resources. And the passwords are the same. for each of them. So I hope is like once you kind of understand what the syntax is, then like even for me, it was like it's a little easier than having to remember what's that random 10-digit number that's associated to that meeting. You know, I booked conference room 2, and when you're on the phone and it's, hey, I can't log in, what's the meeting ID? It's like, oh, okay, the meeting ID is 222-002-1977. And hopefully that makes it a little easier to, you know, be able to differentiate or instruct somebody about how to join. So questions on that?
Thanks for making that the case.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think that should make it a bit easier. Good. All right. And then we're through the deliverables. Questions, open up to anybody on kind of next steps, how to use this. These are available now. You can use them now going forward. Starting tomorrow, I'll be reaching out to individuals who have meetings already scheduled in Zoom for the future. I've already reached out to those individuals previously last week, letting them know we're making this change. And then in earnest, we'll start you know, moving people off of future scheduled meetings from Zoom and rescheduling them on to RingCentral. The way that you would do that, if that's somebody, if you're one of those people, is you would open up your calendar invite for that upcoming meeting. You would go and edit the calendar details associated to that meeting, and you would replace it to one of these room resources and dial in information and details here. And then you would also add which room you have so that somebody else would see it when they look through all the shared calendars, and they would see that this room has already been selected. So questions?
So those meeting ID numbers, those are static, right?
Yeah,
They
they're
won't
static.
change. Those just stay the same. So once you have that, you're good.
Yeah.
Good.
I think some people need to whine.
The chat is hilarious.
All right. Let's be, I'm going to stop share on this and then stop the recording.